Welcome to our Vision 2020 Australia seminar on eye research in Australia. My co-chair, Professor Mark Radford, and myself want to take you on a journey to give you an understanding of the problems that face us working in the vision health and eye healthcare sector, and how the fundamental importance of improving not only our vision research, but how we apply it to develop patient-centered care and improve our patient outcomes. So I'll hand over to my co-chair, Mark Radford, who will set the scene before you hear from our different presenters. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Peter. Hello, my name is Mark Radford from the Queensland Eye Institute, and I'm here to put the 2020 Australian Eye Research Initiative into some sort of context. So why do we need an eye research initiative? And why do we need a comprehensive eye health and vision care strategy roadmap? Well, we need such an initiative to ensure that the best eye health and vision care for all Australians can be achieved. We do this by expanding our understanding of the eye and visual system, developing therapies that prevent or correct vision loss, improve the delivery, effectiveness, and reach of eye care services, improve the quality of life and full participation of people who are blind, have vision loss, or require vision rehabilitation, and to ensure equitable eye care is accessible to all Australians wherever and whenever they need it. Our purpose can be summarized by 5 goals. First, develop a pathway for the eye health and vision research sector. Second, address the growing burden of vision loss. Third, improve equity of access to timely eye health care. Fourth, close the gap. And finally, improve the quality of life for patients with vision impairment. So what is the nature of the problem that we are trying to address? Briefly, vision loss and blindness prevents healthy and independent aging. It reduces mobility. People with vision loss and blindness are twice as likely to use health services, and admission to nursing homes can often be 3 years earlier than otherwise would occur. Vision loss and blindness is also associated with a 3 times increase in depression and anxiety, a 2 times increase in falls, 4 to 8 times increase in hip fractures, and of course, increased dementia and mortality rate. Our challenge is significant but solvable. Over 500,000 Australians suffer from severe vision loss and blindness. That number will double by 2030 without any action. The cost to the Australian economy is in excess of $27 billion, and that cost is rising. Eye health care and vision research is chronically underfunded and is something that we need to immediately address. The worst thing about all of this, or the good thing about all of this, is that up to 80% of vision loss is preventable and or readily treatable. Vision loss is a solvable healthcare problem which we can address today. Thank you.
Thank you very much for asking me to speak on the Eye Health and Vision Strategic Roadmap. And I've been asked to speak on the challenges, and there are a number of challenges, but I firmly believe that Australian eye care professionals and researchers are right up to the challenge, and I'm going to show you why I believe that. I want to thank all the people I work with, and I want to thank Vision 2020 Australia for organising this symposium and for bringing this matter to the fore for our politicians and other interested parties. I'm from the Lions Eye Institute and the University of Western Australia. And so some of the examples I'm showing you are from Western Australia and the Lions Eye Institute, but they're reflective of what's going on right across the country. So if I seem to be biased, I don't mean to be biased, but I'm just using these as examples. So we have particular interest in Indonesia, and it's actually very interesting to compare and contrast. So, for example, in Indonesia, about 13% of their above 40 population are vision impaired. That's about 35 million. And 2% are blind. And that's about 3.7 million. So there's a huge burden of vision loss and blindness just to the north of us. In Australia, we fare much better, but we're not perfect. So we have about a 7% vision impairment rate over the age of 40 and 0.5% blind. So that's about 1/4, if you like, per capita rates of impairment compared to, say, Indonesia, which is a whole lot better, but still could be impaired. The causes of blindness are different. And the knowledge that we have regarding all of this is from several large-scale research surveys, partly funded by the International Association for Prevention of Blindness. But in Indonesia, for example, cataract, glaucoma, and diabetes are the main causes, whereas in Australia, it's macular degeneration, glaucoma, and diabetes. And here I'm really talking about irreversible causes of blindness. One problem with both jurisdictions, including New Zealand, is the fact that the distribution of eye care providers like ophthalmologists and optometrists doesn't always match the at-risk or at-need population. And you can see the map here of the density of eye care provision, Southeast Asia and Australasia. It's very scattered. And that's a big problem that we both face. And the solutions, interestingly, are probably going to be somewhat similar in both locations. So for us in Australia, we clearly have a division in terms of disease prevalence between Indigenous and non-Indigenous. Indigenous populations are much more likely to have vision impairment and blindness and suffer more from diabetic retinopathy, for example, than, say, glaucoma or macular degeneration. Also, their locations are more dispersed in general terms, although not always. In Western Australia, we have been working very hard to try and address this maldistribution of eye care provision, particularly with our Lions Outback Vision Service and the establishment recently of a hub up in Broome. And what's enabled this is different funding models for eye care service provision. And in the north, for example, we use block funding grants from the state and to some extent federal governments to provide salaried services to the at-risk population, which is quite different to the private orientated care in, say, the western, more wealthier suburbs of Perth. Now, that does leave a gap elsewhere. And the gap in the metropolitan areas, which I think is the same across Australia, is such that in the wealthier areas, and in Perth, it's the western suburbs, but it's opposite, say, in Sydney or Melbourne, the western suburbs of Perth are fairly well cared for. And curiously, all of the public eye clinics are in the western suburbs of Perth. There's nothing east of the city. And yet the at-risk population, and if you look at the right-hand plot, the yellow star is Midland, which is the sort of centre of the density of Indigenous population, and it's the largest collection of Indigenous population in the state is in this zone of the eastern metropolitan area. It also directly coincides with the highest density of diabetes and diabetic retinopathy. Whereas if you look where the blue dots are, that is where the public eye hospitals are, and they have the lowest density of diabetes. So the current public eye service provision is exactly opposite to where the need is. So that's a big problem for us. And we're currently working with government to try and address this. The other big issue is the ageing population and the demand growth for eye care services. So the population in WA, and I think it's mirrored across Australia, is growing at about 1.3% per annum on average. But the over 65-year-old population is growing by about 3.7% per annum on average. The service demand for both ophthalmology, it's on the left-hand side of this graph, and optometry, the demand is growing on average at about 3.7%. So pretty much exactly the same rate as the over 65 population growth, actually. It's mirroring that. Slightly less for ophthalmology, but more for optometry. Now, the rate of production, if you like, of new ophthalmologists is increasing, but only at the same rate as the overall population, which is 1.3% per year. Optometry rate of production of new graduates is increasing a little bit more than that, but only by 0.6%, whereas in fact there's about a 2.4% gap. So it's in no way keeping up with the demand for either ophthalmology or optometry. So that's a challenge in terms of service provision across the country, but also service provision as the population in the older age groups expands more and more. Now, the other side of the coin is our research and our ability to develop new treatments to address the 0.7% of the population who lose significant vision. And how can we prevent that? Because blindness, visual impairment, is a significant destroyer of quality of life. If you lose your driver's license, you can't read, you can't walk around, and you're then restricted to a nursing home. That's a big, big problem for you, and also a burden of cost to society. So the research institutes in Australia, I think, really do punch above their weight. At the Institute, we've been involved in several innovations that have made an enormous difference to, in particular, glaucoma, and we've also got some gene therapy trials occurring. The same is mirrored across the country in excellent research institutes across the country. So we add enormous value and can transform applications of care to the at-risk population. So we've got distribution needs, but we've also got advances in therapeutic and diagnostic needs. Now, the support for research is plateauing, unfortunately. This is governmental support, both state and federal combined. And you can see how it's plateaued in the last 5 to 6 years, even with the MRFF. And if you look at overall support for eye research, it's worse than that. So this is a table from the NHMRC outcomes of grants, and you'll see balanced eye and hearing diseases averages about $22, $23 million per year, of which eye research is 1/3 of that on average. The MRFF probably doubles that figure. So if you do the sums and you look at the bottom table, the total contribution by federal government competitive grant funding through the MRC, MRFF, is about 15 million per year. And the state governments don't add much more to that. If you compare us with the United States, they have I would call a much more sophisticated research governance and handling mechanism, where they really understand the need to build up early career researchers and provide a mechanism for their support throughout their entire career trajectory. And this mechanism is the NEI, the National Eye Institute in the United States. And they fund to the tune of 835 million per year, but obviously they've got a much larger population. If we actually reduce that down to make it comparable to the Australian population of 26 million compared to 330 million, then that contribution would actually be $65 million from the US federal or the Australian federal government if we had our own NEI in Australia, compared to 15 million. So it's actually 4 times the amount. And it explains why researchers in the United States are much more secure than they are here, and why researchers in the United States at an earlier stage in their career can get more substantial funding and really build great groups through their R01 and other grant funding mechanisms. So this is a problem for us as we go for increased sustainability. So in summary, the challenge for us in Australia is to provide great eye care across diverse populations, particularly including the Indigenous and non-Indigenous divide and reducing the gap, and across widely spread locations and densities of populations. We really need to expand the scale of service provision to match the increasing need, which is increasing and outstripping our current model's capacity to supply care. And part of that is assisting and working with our near neighbours like Indonesia and the Pacific countries. We've actually got quite a lot to learn from them as we assist them. And I think this will be increasingly important. Now, we are very innovative in our research. We punch well above our population weight. And with the correct support and governance, I believe that we can develop the right systems and platforms to increase and scale up our eye care provision in a cost-effective manner. All of us at the various institutes and universities are developing new treatments, diagnostics and understandings to reduce that 0.7% blindness burden in our community, which is very important. But we are well and truly under-resourced, and it's urgent for federal government and other bodies to look at how we can establish more sustainable support for our research. And the research is not just high-tech drugs or devices, it's the whole business of supplying new models of eye care provision and increasing better access to eye care as well. Thank you very much for asking me to talk. And I think I should stop here. Thank you.
Hello, my name's Sharon Bentley. I'm the Deputy Dean for the Faculty of Health and the Director for the Centre for Vision and Eye Research at Queensland University of Technology. I'm going to present to you on why we critically need vision science. The ability to see is deeply important to humans. In adults, healthy eyes and a healthy visual system can reduce the risk of chronic disease, falls, admission to aged care, isolation, depression, and even death. In children, a healthy visual system contributes to social development, academic achievement, and better overall health across the lifespan. So, understanding and protecting this precious sense is critical. There's no question about the value of vision science to date and the enormous broader impact beyond vision and the eye. A good example is the work of the Nobel Prize winners Hubel and Wiesel, whose vision experiments not only had a profound impact on our understanding about the visual system, but our understanding about how the brain works, specifically how neurons in the brain are organised to produce visual perception. From their initial report in 1959, their experiments extended over more than 25 years, underscoring the importance of investment in this work over a sustained and substantial period of time. Their early work showed the sequence of visual processing in the cat cortex. They measured how distinct neurons responded to distinct visual features, such as the orientation of a line. From there, they made discoveries about the organisation of the cortex in columns that underpinned this processing, the differential response to wavelengths of light, the identification of ocular dominance, the development of that ocular dominance, and the existence of a critical period of neural plasticity, as well as neuronal organisation in the monkey. Their pioneering work and techniques led to an explosion in the number of investigations of other areas of the brain and more complex behavioural questions. Today, there remains much more to understand about the function and biology of the visual system to improve patient care so that we have better prevention, better detection, and better intervention for eye disease and vision impairment. Indeed, given how far the world has advanced, there are unprecedented opportunities for vision science and its translation to patient care. Furthermore, and as demonstrated so well by Hubel and Wiesel, because the eye is easily accessed, what we discover about the eye and visual system will have important application in other parts and systems of the body that are not so easily accessed. And so, vision science is the first core area of the 10-point plan. Some of the most pressing vision science questions of our time are already being addressed by researchers in Australia, to the extent that funding allows, and more support is needed to sustain it. For example, there is important work being undertaken in understanding the genetic mechanisms of eye diseases, and there's much more work that needs to be done in this area. A greater understanding will inform the creation of novel gene therapies to treat eye diseases such as inherited retinal diseases, glaucoma, and macular degeneration. The first single gene therapy using a viral carrier vector for an eye disease was approved by the FDA in 2018. Lions Eye Institute scientists in Western Australia were involved in developing this pioneering work, paving the way for other single gene repair and genetic protein production therapies. Continuing work in genetics requires comprehensive natural history studies, tissue and DNA biobanking for a biomarker and DNA analysis, animal and cell models, and bench-to-patient translation through clinical trials. Another important area of vision science research is cellular reprogramming or stem cell research. Human stem cell models have been shown to be very useful tools to understand monogenic diseases where mutations in one gene drive the disease. However, their use for modelling complex diseases with multiple genetic factors and environmental influences has been less clear. It's now been demonstrated, though, that patients' own stem cells can be used to create models of complex eye diseases like glaucoma and AMD. This work provides potential targets for developing treatments for these prevalent degenerative eye diseases. Availability of donor corneal tissue remains limited globally. There are groups across Australia who are working together to bioengineer a cornea by fabricating tissue in the lab with patient-specific cells. A range of natural and synthetic biomaterials have been investigated, as well as 3D bioprinting, in order to be able to more closely replicate the shape and the structure of the cornea. Indeed, products that adequately mimic the complex corneal anatomy and that are biologically functional is a key goal of future research. Many blinding eye diseases have immune or inflammatory bases. Diseases like uveitis, keratitis, and dry eye, or they have an inflammatory component like AMD or diabetic retinopathy, and this is still poorly understood. Diagnosis and treatment is mostly empirical. Therefore, there's an urgent need to discover better immunological biomarkers and develop therapies. We can see more in the eye than ever before. Retinal imaging plays a central role in eye care, and advances in imaging technology over the last few decades have transformed the detection of a wide range of eye diseases. Although current imaging methods are powerful, further advances are needed and may lead to the identification of biomarkers not only for retinal diseases, but brain diseases like Alzheimer's disease, since the retina shares much in common with the brain. Techniques like hyperspectral imaging, which collects and processes information from across the electromagnetic spectrum, are being investigated. Again, this is helpful not only for early disease detection, monitoring eye disease progression, and evaluating therapies in the eye, but potentially brain diseases. Furthermore, retinal imaging is less invasive and less costly than other tools such as positron emission tomography or cerebrospinal fluid tests, and could be more readily available. Advanced imaging methods are now being combined with a range of image analysis techniques, including artificial intelligence or deep learning, We are demonstrating that AI technologies have the potential to make eye screening more accessible and convenient for patients, and to help clinicians predict the progression of eye disease. And so, AI could effectively serve as a reliable auxiliary tool for clinicians, which could not only reduce the possibility of misdiagnosis, but could also improve the patient experience by expediting efficient treatment. Despite the grand efforts of Hubel and Wiesel, the way in which nerve cells from the eye to the brain are connected to create vision and to perceive colour, form and movement is still poorly understood. We have only relatively recently learned that edge sensitivity is widespread in the visual pathway and is present in the lateral genicular nucleus, the visual relay nucleus, not just in the cerebral cortex. There remain many types of retinal cells about which we understand very little. For example, melanopsin, a receptor found within the retinal ganglion cell layer, plays an important role in non-image forming visual functions, including hormone secretion, entrainment of circadian rhythms, cognitive and affective processes. Projections of melanopsin-containing cells to many brain areas suggest different responses may involve different neural projections, and so different melanopsin cells. What we still don't know is how one protein expressed by just several thousand cells in the retina can be responsible for so many vital and diverse functions. In summary, there is much more to understand about the function and biology of the visual system. If we understand more about vision, we'll also understand more about the brain. Quality vision science takes sustained effort and sustained funding to get there. However, we've demonstrated that it's a great return on investment that leads to better prevention, better detection, and better intervention for eye diseases.
My name is Professor Lisa Key. I'm head of the School of Optometry and Vision Science at the University of New South Wales, and also an honorary professorial fellow at the George Institute for Global Health. I'm really delighted to be able to speak to you today about the priority areas relating to prevention. Targeted research is needed to test the viability of innovations in prevention and early detection strategies that can serve to reduce vision loss and the impacts of vision loss in other areas of health and well-being. An evidence base is needed to inform prevention, to promote more timely diagnosis and appropriate access to treatment, as described in the Vision 2020 Australia Roadmap. Now, fortunately, in Australia, we have national data, which is derived from a representative survey, which tells us exactly what's going on with the causes of vision loss. This data that's shown on the slide here describes the causes of vision loss, which lead to vision impairment defined by the level of visual acuity. And the level of visual acuity that we're looking at is around about 612, which is what we get tested for to maintain a driving license. So you can see from this graph that there's major causes of vision loss, and some are as simple as needing refractive correction, which we can do with spectacles, contact lenses, and other means. But there's other major causes of vision loss that we need to tackle. These include age-related macular degeneration, diabetic retinopathy, glaucoma, and also cataract, as well as other mixed causes of vision loss. So the good thing about having this information is this can provide us directions for where to invest to have better impact. And we know from extrapolating these proportions up to the entire population that a staggering number of Australians are impacted by vision loss, estimated to be about 453,000 from this survey. It's also important to note that it's not just impacting everyone equally, it's actually really inequitable, that some disadvantaged members of our community are far more likely to be impacted by vision loss. And that's particularly the case for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Australians that are at a 3 times increased risk of vision impairment. Reassuringly, however, many of the causes of vision loss are preventable. Many of the conditions that I outlined in the previous slide had treatment options available, such as cataract surgery and providing refractive services, and other causes of vision loss are dependent on timely diagnosis and getting people to the right treatment in a timely fashion. And these numbers are obviously reflective of a broader issue around the globe. And we estimate that 2.2 billion people globally have vision impairment, and at least half of those could be ameliorated through prevention. Cataract surgery is a really important condition to treat, and this is for a number of reasons. A lot of people have cataract-related vision impairment, and we saw that in the prevalence slide, but also it's easily treated with surgery. So why do we still have many people around Australia with cataract-related vision impairment? And this relates to accessibility of services. The National Atlas Exploring Inequities in Healthcare looked at cataract surgery rate. And what you can see from the different colours on this map of Australia is that there's some areas in the darker blues where there's quite a lot of surgeries going on. And there's other areas in the very light colours where there's very little surgery. And you can see that this can be in our rural and regional remote areas, but also when you look close up at the cities that many of us are familiar with, you can see that lower socioeconomic parts of our cities have really lower levels of service. So there's many reasons why this can happen, but one of them could be that we don't have good access to surgeries through our public health system. And we do need innovation and new strategies to try and streamline services and ensure there's access for all Australians to this sight-saving surgery. Now, there's broader applications of having vision impairment than just the actual impact on not being able to see well. And we know that vision impairment is related to many of our different areas of life. This simulation on the slide shows some of these age-related changes to vision. And the simulation here is relating to cataracts and glaucoma. So you can see that what you would see on the left with normal vision, which is nice, clearly defined edges to stairs, is really lost in the right-hand side, where cataract stops the light getting through to the eye, and glaucoma can actually cause loss of visual field, particularly in the periphery. And there's a whole wealth of data that shows that when you lose vision, you're actually much more likely to fall. And this is a big issue for older Australians, with falls being the leading cause of hip fracture and a major cause of hospitalizations from injuries, particularly in older adults. There's many different aspects of vision that contribute to falls risk, and similar from this picture, you can see that it's central vision impairment. It's also losing the peripheral field where you won't be able to detect obstacles as easily, and specific eye diseases actually increase the risk of falls. But fortunately, we can advocate and we can make the case that if we meet the problems that we have in eye health, then we can actually have benefits for general health. So we've partnered with Vision 2020 Australia to get evidence from Australia showing these inequities in access in our health system and demonstrating the rate of falls that we get when people have unoperated cataract. This was a modelling study that's shown here on this slide, and this showed a clear business case for government to invest in cataract surgery services. It was estimated that through providing timely access to surgery, we could prevent the known complication of falls that occurs at a higher rate when people have cataracts, but also other problems like motor vehicle crashes, which are at an increased risk when we have unoperated cataract. And in fact, if the government invested and got more surgeries done and reduced the waiting time, for example, from 12 months down to 3 months, you could prevent over 50,000 falls. And in fact, even with the cost of doing those surgeries, you can save the health system over $6 million. So there's a clear case to do this, but obviously with competing demands in our health system, we really have to work hard to keep eye health on the agenda. Now let's think about what's happening in the future. We obviously have an aging population, and there's this is the same in many countries around the world. And what we know from these projections is that we're going to get increasing numbers of people with vision impairment. You can see on this graph that some of these major causes of vision loss, cataracts, glaucoma, and age-related macular degeneration, all get much higher in older age groups. So the 80+ there's a very large proportion of those older Australians having these eye conditions. And it's actually quite exponential, the increase, particularly in age-related macular degeneration. So we can use these proportions and model changes in the population, including population growth. And we can see that while we've got, quite substantial numbers at the moment, more than 250,000 people with vision-related disability, as we can see from this ABS survey, this is only going to grow, and it's highly age-related. And in the future, we're going to be dealing with these conditions in far greater numbers. So obviously, we need to really put our efforts towards prevention to minimise the impact. We know that these conditions are quite related to other health conditions, and they're particularly exacerbated when people have other systemic diseases such as diabetes, heart disease, and also other consequences such as hearing impairment and depression that can be occurring at the same time and exacerbating the impacts of other conditions. And this is just a graphic to remind us that we do have to think about the whole person. We're obviously got a very big focus on eye health and treating visual complaints, but eye health actually impacts your general health because you're at a greater risk of other health conditions if you do have visual impairment. In fact, you're at an increased risk of mortality. So people are between 1.3 and 1.7 times greater risk of all-cause mortality, and particular cardiovascular disease mortality. So the things we can do to help with cardiovascular disease could also help your eye health. So there's a lot of combined efforts that we can focus on. There are common risk factors, and there's also some of the indirect consequences. So if you don't see well, you have less ability to access healthcare and have those benefits that could be available to people for their other health conditions. And Australia is obviously a member of the global community and working towards better eye health. And there was a unanimous resolution at the 73rd World Health Assembly with regards to integrated people-centered eye care and really setting some targets there so that we can use eye health as a measure and an important component of working towards universal health coverage. So these targets have been set and they have been endorsed by Australia, and we're really working towards, as a high-income country, achieving it at the very upper end of these targets. And this is going to be absolutely informed by innovations in prevention, in detection, monitoring, enabling access to treatment, and critically addressing inequity. And I guess we also want to build on some of the incredible innovations that my other colleagues have spoken about in this presentation today. And while we might discover incredible links and really work out the pathophysiology and why people are at greater risk, whether it's their genetic, their genes, or whether it's the environment and where they are in our communities, we can enable precision medicine and provide personalized treatment for the very best health outcomes. So prevention also includes these great technologies and translating that basic science into real world outcomes and benefits for people in the community. And it's always worth reminding us that research is along a continuum of between the innovation and the idea generation and when we actually get to have the benefits in the community. So there's obviously lots of steps involved, and the process of implementation science and health systems research are actually essential disciplines to really getting some of these preventive measures scaled and available to people who need them most. So obviously it's important that we harness these ideas, test them for their effectiveness, and then move things to scale and therefore find the benefits. So fortunately, there's lots of foundations that we can work with to enable us to do things in the right way. We've got strategies for working with our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community members so that we can provide care in the right way in an appropriate framework. There's incredible research into biomarkers, genomics, new ocular imaging and functional testing methodologies. artificial intelligence, great work in children's vision and health system integration. All of these come under the banner of prevention. We really need to enhance multidisciplinary teamwork and keep at our front of mind patient-centered care and the best use of our limited healthcare resources. On this slide also is a nice graphic, which is actually from New South Wales Health, which describes dimensions of quality. And this reminds us that it's not just about the technical delivery of healthcare, it's what the patient perceives or our community members perceive with healthcare. It needs to be equitably accessible. It needs to be mindful of an appropriate mode of delivery and provided in a timely fashion. So there's lots of components and we need to keep these front of mind. And obviously with better understanding of the interface between the patient and the healthcare system, we can get the very best outcomes. So in summary, I've shared quite a lot of numbers today, but the one that you need to take home is that 90% of vision loss and blindness is preventable. So prevention is absolutely core to our mission of better eye health for Australians. We've got lots of people impacted by vision impairment and it's very inequitable. So there's parts of the community that we really need to direct our efforts. Vision loss is strongly associated with aging, so that means it's going to become even more urgent as the years progress. Our population is aging and we have very many systemic comorbidities that are entwined with eye health that we need to address holistically so that we get the best outcomes for patients and our members of the community. So implementation science can bring innovations in vision science and treatments to scale, and this is where we can really operationalize prevention. So thanks very much for your attention, and I'll hand over to the next speaker.
Hello, I'm Professor Stephanie Watson, Head of the Corneal Research Unit at the Safe Sight Institute, University of Sydney, and the Chair of Australian Vision Research. And I'm going to talk about treatment and support and what we can do from a research perspective. So this arm of the Vision 2020 Ophthalmic Research Plan involves developing and trialling new and more effective treatment and support strategies for people with vision loss. Now, the aim is to improve the delivery of services and expand opportunities for people who are blind or who require visual rehabilitation. And the overall view here is to improve quality of life for these patients. Now, as part of our research initiative, we came up with some core areas for focus for research across Australia. And here are some of the focus areas. Those highlighted in blue are the ones that relate to treatment and support. So a lot of our focus areas do deal with providing better treatments and also providing ways to support people while they're awaiting treatments or after their treatment. This is some further cores, and I'll discuss this a little bit more in detail around the ways that treatment and support have been included in our Vision 2020 research plan. So this is one of our key aims, and that is to develop personalized treatments. And we need this because everybody experiences disease in a slightly different way, and they can have slightly different manifestations and risk factors for diseases that are compromising their eye health. And the personalized treatments really allow us to intervene at different disease stages in order to reverse vision loss and restore vision. So to do this, we need to have research into how we apply advanced therapeutics. And this is things such as gene therapy, messenger RNA technology, and even stem cells to restore sight. So here is one of our core areas that deals with treatment and support. And here we're trying to achieve vision for life. So our research core question was, how can we reduce the effect of degenerative sight-threatening diseases on quality of life in an aging population? And how can we better support people living with a lifetime burden of disease? And for this, the sort of research we need is new approaches to manage common blinding eye diseases. And this is by finding new targets for treatment. using studies that can actually translate things from science to the clinic. But also health services research, because even though we might have a treatment, sometimes that treatment is not reaching patients. So we need to understand how to deliver our treatments and get them into the health system and get them straight to the patients when they need them. And then more effective delivery methods. For example, intravitreal injections are now the mainstay of treatment for wet age-related macular degeneration. But this treatment involves injecting medications into the eye. Clearly, if we had better ways to get medications into the eye, patients could avoid the pain, discomfort, and also risks of such injections. We also need to have new approaches to reduce the burden of sight-threatening diseases that impact quality of life at different stages of life. And so we've found with eye diseases, for instance, that the quality of life impacts really vary according to patient's age and also the disease that they're affected by. So there might not be one approach, there might be multiple approaches we need can intervene at these different stages when the patient's quality of life is being affected by their eye disease. This is a new area where we think research will really bring new treatments and restore sight, and that's gene therapy. And this will be particularly useful for patients with inherited retinal disease. This group of patients has often early onset loss of vision, and there are now treatments emerging that can prevent a vision loss occurring. Gene therapy is also going to be useful for dysgenesis of the front of the eye, for anterior segment and ocular surface disease. Now, stem cells will also have a role, and so it's important that research continues into stem cell therapies. And one of the areas I've been involved in is limbal stem cell transplantation. And looking at the literature, there have been around 30 studies reported looking at whether this treatment is successful. And there is success generally with improvement in vision and restoration of a stable corneal surface in the majority of people. But we don't know the long-term outcomes, and such treatments are not widely available to most patients. We're working in the lab on developing models to understand how limbal stem cells work. Ultimately, if we can rescue and encourage better functioning of the existing stem cells, then there'll be less of a need for stem cell transplantation techniques. And our models in the lab reflect the current clinical picture of stem cell failure, where we see this whorl-like keratopathy across the corneal surface. This is a photo of a patient with limbal stem cell deficiency in the early stages. And you can see there's a swirl-like pattern on their cornea, which is the disorganized epithelium that blurs the vision. So an example of a research core area and question for our Vision 2020 ophthalmic research strategies is to look at preclinical and clinical trials and how we can enhance our clinical trials capacity to improve patient care. And we can do this by establishing and supporting a coordinated clinical trials network across Australia. And we can also look at ways to do clinical trials more effectively in order to improve patient care, and look at ways that we can support translation of research concepts and models into clinical trials. So ways to fast track the trials, make sure they can deliver the results we need to actually provide data for regulation so we can get treatments approved and into the clinic. Another core area is increasing treatment effectiveness. And if we want some treatments to work, it's important that we give them early enough. For example, in keratoconus, we can now prevent progression with cross-linking, but unfortunately, we still see patients who are progressed along the disease pathway with their vision quite affected and who are then not eligible to have treatments such as corneal cross-linking. So we need research into finding the markers of early stage disease and disease progression. we can then understand better when we need to intervene and how we need to intervene. So we need to develop therapies for previously untreatable sight-through eye diseases and develop and translate pathophysiological concepts into these techniques. So that is, we need to really get back to basic science to understand disease mechanisms in order to better target our treatments, both the purpose of the treatment and when to give the treatment. We need to continue to optimize our therapies and investigate diagnostic tools that are able to use things like novel imaging of functional, genetic, and other methods to individualize our treatment decisions, to decide when and how to intervene. Now, clinical trials have been very useful for showing us if a treatment works. But once a treatment is in the real world, patients are given the treatment in a number of ways. And the patients that receive the treatment can have many different comorbidities. And this is unlike clinical trials, where the patient groups are often very narrow. There's many inclusion and exclusion criteria, and the trials are run over short periods of time. So we're now realizing that registries can be very helpful in evaluating treatment outcomes in the real world. Patients with comorbidities, and when the treatments are given in different ways. They also enable us to track long-term outcomes and include safety data. An example of a registry currently functioning in Australia is the Save Sights Keratoconus Registry. And this has been able to collect outcomes data with the amount of data increasing at a rate of about 10% a month, but also facilitated benchmarking for clinicians. Clinicians who use the registry can compare the results of their treatments with those of everyone else in the registry, and patients can see their treatment journey. The registries are an important pillar of our research in Australia, and will help us advance our knowledge into treatment outcomes, to design better treatments and to make sure the ones we're giving are working in the real world. Support is also very important, because patients with vision loss live often with significant impacts on their quality of life. So we need to improve our understanding of how to reduce the effect of degenerative sight-threatening diseases on the quality of life in populations such as those aging, but also in the young. We need better research into the best practice way of engaging patients and also promoting health to our patients. We need to improve the understanding of the impacts of eye disease on independence and quality of life. In a recent study using data from the Save Sight registries, we found that patients with keratoconus actually had poorer quality of life scores than those with macular degeneration and other retinal diseases. Now, the patient population affected by keratoconus generally tends to be those that are younger, and they have different visual needs and expectations for their life ahead. We need to understand how diseases are impacting patients to provide the appropriate support. To learn more about the support that's needed for patients, we really need to engage patients. We need to find out their needs. We need to involve patients in research and care delivery. We need to improve the interactions between patient and healthcare professional in order to improve our care delivery. So that is, if clinicians can understand more about the impacts of quality of life of eye diseases, they can then target their treatments to address these. We need to consider that each eye disease may have a different impact on the patient's quality of life in order to develop tailored advice to provide better support. And we need to improve our visual aids and rehabilitation means. In regards to health promotion, there's a large number of eye conditions that have a component that is preventable. And if we can promote the need for taking care and screening of the eyes and eye diseases, we can then pick up these conditions and provide measures to prevent them getting worse. And this includes things like trauma, where protective eyewear can have a significant role, glaucoma, which is often not diagnosed, because it can be asymptomatic, diabetes, where general health care contributes to the outcome, corneal infection, such as through contact lens wear, which can be prevented often with better hygiene, and vitamin A deficiency, which is largely related to diet. So in summary, we need new treatments and new approaches, and research will provide some of these answers. We need to track outcomes and understand how best to benefit our patients with our treatments. And then importantly, we need to always consider what can we prevent. Thank you very much.
I'm just going to try and bring together the presentations that we've heard and summarize the fabulous talks and information that we've got over the past hour. So you've heard about the challenges of the geography of Australia and our skewed population distribution. You've heard how we really need to improve and enlarge on our understanding of the biology of the eye and the various blinding eye diseases. We've talked about the critical importance of patient-centered care and the need to benchmark and audit patient outcomes so that we can improve the patient journey, support patients with vision loss, and last but by no means least, close the gap across between our Indigenous Australians and the rest of the community. And as Mark Radford said at the beginning, our aim is to do this collaboratively with across the whole eye healthcare and vision research sector. Vision 2020 is our leading advocacy organisation, and so this collaboration is being led by Vision 2020 Australia. Our aim is to develop a single voice for advocacy to the government and other stakeholders, and we want to develop a virtual eye research and collaborative eye care network to facilitate this. Our first major goal is to secure an MRFF mission for vision, and we've started that journey, but of course, like most things, it was grossly disrupted by the COVID pandemic. But during the pandemic, we kept working and we developed a 10-point plan to enhance ophthalmic research in Australia. And as you've seen in the presentations, this is across three core areas: understanding vision science, preventing vision loss from blinding eye disease, remembering that at least 80% of the eye disease in our country is preventable or treatable if we get onto it and diagnose it early. And the third core area, of course, is supporting our patients, maximising their outcomes and ensuring the best possible patient journey. To do that, we've developed 10 focus research areas or focus areas across those three core areas. And I won't go through this slide, which lists them all again, but I think the important, or one of the many important take-home messages from our presentation is that we're working together, we've got a common goal, it's patient-centred, and it's an achievable goal. Blindness in Australia is a solvable problem, and there's a lot of work to do, and we all want to go on this journey together. So thanks very much for your attention, and I look forward to talking to you again. Thank you.